So like we said, equitable marketing practice for adult students of color. Let me get our... So we'll start by talking a little bit about how do we think about, student voice. We hear all the time, right? We need student voice. We need to get students' input. But that can be tricky and that can be hard. And it's also like, okay, well, to what end? And so we'll start by talking a little bit about how to think about the role that student voice plays as you're thinking about developing marketing materials and tactics, and what are some strategies for actually engaging students and being flexible in what that engagement looks like. We'll talk about some best practices for how to actually create the marketing materials themselves. How should you think about images, language, etc. Getting more into the weeds of how do we think about what we call channel research. So channel is basically like, where is this living? Is it a poster in a community center? Is it a LinkedIn ad? Is it a what? And how do you be as strategic as possible about choosing the right channels given your audience? And then our team actually had the pleasure of helping design and develop Achieving the Dream's new strategy hub. And they have a section in there on recruiting adult learners, and wanted to highlight some innovative strategies that some of the colleges they've been working with have been using, and that we've kind of gotten into the weeds on as we helped them figure out how to showcase that content to their client of ours as well. All right. Well, I'll hand it over to Kate. She'll do the bulk of it, and I'll just, kind of chime in at the end.
Well, hi, everyone. So glad to be here today. Before we dive into what Elizabeth just shared as our agenda today, really want to kind of ground all of it in this idea of taking a targeted approach to marketing, which can feel sometimes really counterintuitive, right? You think we want to cast a wide net. We want to get as many students as possible. We want to be as broad as possible. But one thing that we know about marketing and communications generally is that the broader we are, the more vague we have to be, and the less likely that it's going to be compelling, that it's going to reach the target, right? And so when we think about taking a targeted approach to marketing, that enables us to be more intentional and ultimately more effective with our efforts. If we think about adult students of color, we're already really talking about, we're broadly bucketing the audience anyway, right? We know that within adult students of color, there are all these populations that are represented there. And so being able to think as we get into like, what are the messages and tactics and all of that on what are the specific populations of adult students of color that we want to focus our efforts on, means that we can be more narrow in how we talk about, how we use the messaging, about, the channels, as Elizabeth mentioned, that are going to be most effective for us. And ultimately, it's going to feel more intentional, and it's going to have a better chance of having the result and reaching the folks that we want to reach. And so how do we get to thinking about like, what are the specific populations that we want to focus on? And we've just added some kind of guiding questions here to help really drill down and get to that focus specific to the reach work, which are like, which populations of adult students of color have lowest attainment rate in our region? Where are they underrepresented in terms of your college, your current enrollment? What populations are underrepresented in careers that align with your pathways? So looking at that labor market data. And then which populations are overrepresented in pathways that lead to kind of the lower wage careers? We know that reach, there's that, racial equity component baked into the name and into the pathways that we're designing. So really thinking about not just the credential and degree attainment as the goal, but the career outcomes. We just talked about, with Rio Hondo, like identifying gaps is another question that you could look at. So like, where do we see gaps in the workforce? So there's lots of things that can help you kind of drill down and say, okay, within this bucket of adult students of color, we want to focus our marketing efforts on these specific populations before we kind of move into the actual developing the marketing. Elizabeth mentioned student voice. We know that this is probably the most vital input that we can have on our marketing efforts, our communications efforts for adult students of color, is our current students. We have an opportunity to learn from them about what resonates with them, and knowing that will likely resonate with other potential students. So when we convene students, we want to maximize that. And so we convene them to gain insights into what motivates them, what concerns they have, what questions they have, key selling points. We want to use that opportunity to gather some great, compelling testimonials that we can use in our marketing efforts. And then we also want to use them to kind of solicit feedback, to do some gut check on our messaging, like what's working, what's not working, where do they, it's such helpful feedback to get from, as close to your target audience as you can get. They were the students who enrolled, so they can really give you, critical feedback. So we know we want to engage student voice. Big questions are, how do we get it? What do we do with it? And so towards that encouraging participation, a few thoughts, best practices that we've shared here is incentivize, right? We know that particularly with adult students of color, they are busy folks. They've got a lot on their plates. If we're going to ask them to come and be part of a focus group, take some time out of their busy days, we want to make it worth their while and acknowledge that it's another thing that they're putting on their plate. So to the extent that we can incentivize them, we definitely think that's a best practice. We want to provide some alternative options for folks who coming and taking an hour out of their day, in person simply isn't an option. We don't want to not capture the voices of those folks. So can we do virtual focus groups? Can we, and I've seen this done before with like creating a web page that's like, share your story with us with some very specific questions and prompts. And again, we want to like try to incentivize them. If they complete, if they submit a video submission answering those questions, can we then send them a virtual Starbucks card, a credit at the bookstore, something like that, that recognizes that they're, again, giving of their time to do that. And then incorporate it into existing events. What do we already have that we can maybe kind of like, sneak in some of that opportunity to get student voice, whether it's a video booth, a prize wheel, some Zoom polls during info sessions. There's lots of ways that we can look at things that have already been communicated or already being planned, that we can maybe utilize those as opportunities to gather that student voice. Then once we have some of this great input and perspective from students, we want to make sure that it's feeding our marketing efforts. And so what are we looking to get out of that student voice? Well, we want to speak to motivating factors. We know that like the why for our current students is probably going to resonate with our prospective adult students of color. If they're doing it for their families to provide a better life for them, if they're doing it because they made a promise to themselves, all the whys, how can we infuse that into our messaging? Because we know that that could really pull some threads with some of our prospective students that we're trying to reach. We also want to proactively address questions and concerns. If there are reasons that they hesitated maybe to enroll, it took them longer than we would have liked because they were worried about A, B, and C, how can we speak to that with in our marketing materials on our website? If there were things that they found confusing or difficult in the process, how can we use that to make it a little bit simpler or speak to that process to kind of like lay it out a little more clearly? We want to highlight the most compelling features. They can tell us about their program and what were the key decision drivers, what have they enjoyed most about their program, all of that, those great nuggets that we can use in our marketing efforts. And then again, we're gathering these testimonials, and we know that sometimes hearing directly, even though we have all this great messaging, that direct communication from adult students of color can be so powerful. So how can we infuse that into our marketing efforts? Visuals are such an important part of the marketing materials that we create. And we talk about visual representation and really want to challenge to go beyond just this idea that visual representation means that we're showing different racial identities. Our visuals are, again, an opportunity to support the messaging and the story that we're telling and the pathways that we're trying to promote to show that we recognize adult students of color are fully realized, holistic individuals. They're more than just their racial identity. They have families and dreams and goals. They have busy lives. And so how can we use imagery that infuses that understanding of who they are and why they, matter to us, and that we know all of this into the visual part of our marketing efforts? Some other examples of potential images that we have here, just to share. We tend to, we know that stock imagery is a thing we all have to lean into. Using stock images that don't feel too stocky, for lack of a better term. They're not too posed. They're not too, we want a little bit more of that authenticity. It's just really engaging. Sometimes being an adult student of color is we're at the laundromat and I'm studying next to my son who's reading a book. And we know that that's real life for them. We can show that in our marketing materials to say, hey, we know you've got a lot going on. We're going to try to make this the best, possible option for you that we can because we see you. And sometimes it's sitting at a computer with your sleeping baby, but we think this, these images really help to tell a story and support the messaging. Here's an example as we think about like student testimonials. Here's an example of something that the Friday team created working with one of our other partners named Neo. They are an alternative education provider working with adult students who are working towards their high school diploma. And, this is a way of showing this, again, whole individual, fully realized. We have a student here, meet Travis. He's a poet, he's a contractor, he's a student dad. And it just says some really interesting things about him and that he's unique, and we recognize that. And so this is part of some campaign collateral that we created for this client. But you can imagine doing something like this with the pathways and with adult, the reach pathways that we're creating.
Any questions so far before we go to our next section?
I do have a question. When I'm trying to get pictures that reflect our students, it's so limited. So do you have any recommendations of vendors that have pictures that actually reflect our population?
Yeah, I would say that I agree with you. It's very limited. It is getting better. Like one of the photos on that slide before of the woman sitting, that we found on Canva. I know some of you may be familiar with that tool. And, it's, they are starting to have a lot better images. I think it kind of gets to the point of where you're refining your search for some of those things. Because when you say, like if I'm on Canva and I say student parent, well, it's going to show a small student and a parent. So really getting down to like, what are the right ways to kind of search for some of these images are, you'll kind of like, once you start to find some pictures like that, you'll be like, oh, those are the kind of the right search terms. Those are the way to find those things. As you can see, some of these other ones are iStock photos. So it's really, there is a little bit of, it's getting better, I think is the high level takeaway there, but there are kind of refining your search for those photos is something that takes a little bit of trial and error.
The two other things that I would add there is one, is as much as possible, like trying to plan ahead and having a photographer at certain events and getting your own images. I know a lot of campuses do kind of have a photographer or even photography students. And so thinking about, again, if like, oh, we're gonna have like a prize wheel at our orientation and you answer 5 questions and you spin the wheel, like let's have a photographer there taking a photo. Or when we have our assessor coming in to do a training, let's get some photos there. And so I think being as much as possible thinking about leveraging resources on your own campus, photography students, marketing photographers, etc., is always helpful. And then if you really want to go fun, our team is actually having a lot of luck creating AI generated images. So if you want to go down that rabbit hole, what's nice about that is you can like specify like I want a person of color, getting specific, and then you can refine it. And so that also helps you like not use the same stock image that everyone's used because it's it's generated by AI. So our team actually, I think for the Reach conference, for those who were able to attend that, all of those images were AI generated. And we can follow up too with some like specific sources we like. Oh. All right.
So next kind of input as we think about marketing materials is data. And again, really thinking about who our audience is. And it's hard in a focus group to say, like, what data matters to you? One resource that we found that we've used here is like this turning the mirror that data adult learners of color want to see is a report that was produced by SOVA. It's supported by Lumina Foundation, who also supports the REACH Collaborative. And they've done a lot of the work in terms of looking at like what data do students say really is irrelevant to them. A lot of the data that we think is important and is important to us as the college and the folks doing the work when we look at retention rate, persistence rate, all of that. Students find that, adult students of color find that confusing, irrelevant. They're much more interested in how the college helps students like them succeed. So data like what we have listed here about demographic data, they want to know about representation at the college. They want to know about the outcomes and the ROI data in terms of career outcomes, data about relevant supports. All of those kinds of things that are really about their experience is much more interesting to them, much more compelling to them than some of the data that we measure in terms of outcomes. So we can definitely share the link to this report. There's a lot of just like really good information, and they've done a lot of the work in terms of doing focus groups and identifying what data really resonates with adult students of color and what doesn't. Here's an example of like, as we talk about the data that matters and the messaging here of one of the SUNY schools, they are showing the ROI here, like get job ready in 1 year, here's your average salary. Very clear, very compelling, and really speaks to the kinds of information that is going to motivate a potential student. We also, when we get down into the messaging, we want to think about the kind of language that we're using. I know a lot of the work with REACH is around like culturally sustaining practices and really thinking about how we talk to our students, adult students of color. And we at Friday are really focused on using asset-based language to let students know that we believe they can succeed. We've put some words here about how we envision positioning students, ourselves, and our pathways. These are not necessarily the words that we use in our messaging, but we want the messaging that we use to position us this way. When we think about students, they are resilient, resourceful, determined, all of these things. They are overcoming challenges. We, as the college, are welcoming, we're supportive, we're empathetic, we're empowering. We know that they have the power, right? We are empowering them. We are community focused and we're culturally responsive. And then how are we describing our pathways? They are clear, they are career aligned, they are skill based, and they're culturally affirming. So these are the ways that, again, we might not necessarily use the term culturally affirming in our messaging, because that's, not, it's a little jargony. It's not clear when we're talking to adult students of color, but we definitely want our messaging to reflect this positioning. Here's some more examples as we think about, and these are more general examples, but I think you could see how they would apply on using asset-based versus deficit-based language. So positioning the nonprofit or the college as we're the hero in the story. We improve communities. No, the asset-framed rewrite is we partner with communities in their efforts to engage young people and inspire entrepreneurship. Another kind of like deficit-based approach that we want to try to avoid and maybe like reframe is this positioning the community as the problem. We empower at-risk youth to overcome high crime environments. Well, great. Now you've called my neighborhood high crime, which does not compel me, does not make me feel like you are a welcoming environment. So we help children navigate their circumstances to chase their dreams. They're navigating circumstances that have nothing to do with them, that have nothing to do with their families and their neighborhoods. These are just circumstances that they are overcoming and navigating to chase their dreams. And the last kind of third example is this overselling of the crisis and underselling people. And what that looks like is our approach dismantles disruptive barriers to racial equity in higher education, right? We might, in some cases say that or how we would discuss it maybe internally, but it's very deficit based. And so we would envision flipping that to say our anti-racist approach invites all students to enrich their institutions. So you can hear the kinds of words that we're using in the messaging and how that really helps to reframe it in an asset-based way. Another example of how we're using student stories when we think about testimonials. This again is another one of our partners at John Muir Charter Schools that really has leaned into using these student testimonials where you're getting a little bit of a quote here. This is something that's on their website. And then you can click through and watch the whole video testimonial and hear directly from those students to have that opportunity to have that direct exposure to current students and hear what they have to say about what they're experiencing at the school.
And something I would add here is I think, there's obviously those like quick hit, 1 year average salary type information that is important. But we recommend when you're using stories that you think about this as this, okay, students might even have internal narratives about what's possible for themselves. They might have been told their whole life that like school isn't for them, they can't do math, whatever, right? Or that, college is just or isn't for people like me, right? And so how can we make sure that we're thinking about, when it comes to stories in particular, helping break down those internal narratives, whether they're fair or not, that can get in the way. And so you'll know, as you think about like creating a belonging and ability to see yourself in this program, creating hope that, oh, wow, this is actually possible. And then sort of the like tough love version of that is the excuse buster. Like, this is proof it's possible. If so-and-so can do it, like, so can you. And so you'll notice these quotes, and I know they're a little small, but these are not focusing on the attributes of this program. It's not about, but it's about this narrative. So things like, before I moved here, I wasn't the best student. My schooling was bad. My attendance was bad. Coming here gave me time to catch up and heal from what I needed to heal from. And that's not a, wow, I got, 1 year, 30K salary. There's a place for that information, but we find that stories are more valuable in helping kind of break down those narratives. And getting into the wonky stuff now.
Yeah, I love this stuff. I know that some people, it makes their eyes glaze over and their brains hurt, so we won't go too deep into it, but happy to answer any deep questions that folks have. But recognize that, once we create all of these great materials, how are we thinking about getting them in the hands or in front of the folks that we want to see them? Requires doing a little bit of channel research and knowing where to reach our adult learners of color. And specifically, this is again where this like targeted approach to marketing is helpful. Because you aren't trying to blast it everywhere. You are thinking very intentionally about specific populations of adult students of color. And if you're doing any sort of like putting some budget behind some ad spend, that kind of intentional targeted focus is going to make that budget go farther. But knowing, okay, where should we be focusing that ad spend? Where should we be placing our posters and our materials? There's information out there that's available to look at. Nielsen has great demographic data if you're thinking about and very, very focused, like region specific demographic data. If you're thinking about doing radio or TV ads, what radios, if you're thinking about, Black students of color, what are the most popular radio stations for Black listeners within your, and within a certain age group in your region? Those are the kinds of things that you can get from that demographic data that Nielsen provides. Another thing is really thinking about cultural events, like where can, as we're trying to focus on these specific populations, what are the right kinds of community partner websites, newsletters, different places where we want to be represented because we know that there may be a high visibility among the populations we're trying to reach in those places. Same with physical locations, right? Thinking about churches, community centers, what minority owned or serving businesses exist in our target regions that we could say, hey, would it be okay if we put a flyer up here or a poster here? But being, we know that there's not the time or the ability to go poster all over the place. So being very intentional in who we go to and make these asks of and where we spend our marketing dollars. last channel research slide, and then we're done with the wonky stuff and happy to take any questions. Social media, obviously a big channel for, well, just in general, but specifically with our marketing efforts. Again, you could so quickly spend budget on social media, or just time. How about just time posting things? There is a lot of Pew Research Center does a lot of studying and sharing data about social media, and they look at men, women, they look at racial demographics, they look at economic, they look at education level. They really break it down, and it's super interesting if you get into that kind of stuff. The high level, I've put some of the kind of high level takeaways here, is that Instagram, about half of Hispanic and Black Americans say they use that platform. 76% if you're looking at 18 to 24-year-olds. YouTube, that goes up to 95%. YouTube is one of the fastest growing channels for people in that age group. Same, pretty high still with Snapchat and TikTok, 75%, 55% for that same age group. And then Facebook obviously is faster growing with some older, groups, as we know, but still pretty high in terms of, as you can see from the chart that we have here, and the numbers that Pew reported, it's still pretty high for the younger age groups and with what we would see as like our targets within, adult students of color. LinkedIn is one where we love LinkedIn. We use it a lot for, with partners and our work. LinkedIn is a great channel for promoting the work that you're doing. It is not really an optimal channel when we're thinking about marketing to potential students. It has a much higher, it's a higher level of education among those who are using it, in terms of like LinkedIn users or what they're reporting. And so we probably don't want to spend a lot of time or focus with our intentional targeted marketing efforts on that specific channel. So I will pause there. Any questions that have bubbled up, or anything we can speak more to?
Okay. Well, then I'll
We
move
can
us
leave
into
data land.
our last section and give us, I work like actually pretty close to time. I'm impressed. So as I mentioned, everything from here on out has been pulled from the Achieving the Dream Strategy Hub, which would encourage you to take a look at. They have a whole section on strategies for supporting adult learners. 4 of these strategies we've called out. A lot of this overlaps with some of the things we've talked about, but thinking about career-focused marketing campaigns, which makes sense. Obviously, you are working in many ways on pathways that are career-focused and aligned. And so as the example we heard earlier, like let's actually focus creative marketing campaigns specifically on promoting, real estate and assessor opportunities, and have that be a very career-focused campaign versus just a, Rio Hondo campaign, right? Like how are we focusing on the career aspect? Also making sure that you're thinking about your digital presence. There are some community colleges, a lot of community colleges actually, that have actually completely rebranded in order to be more accessible and speak more directly to adult learners, recognizing that that's a growing part of their enrollment. But if that's not possible, you can still create adult learner focused landing pages, and even adult learner specific or of color focused landing pages. So that if people like go to the URL that's on a poster or click an ad, it's going to a page that you don't want to like do all this work to create an ad or a poster that like used all our student voice to create this beautiful experience, and they just land on your homepage and it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't have the same important career information. And so you really want to think about kind of where they're landing, and not forget about that. Some colleges are also specifically creating adult learner outreach associate positions that are dedicated to leading outreach efforts for adult learners. And these folks tend to be in particularly focused on some of those more like grassroots, like partnership building, how can we think about community organizations, community events, cultural events, etc. And because you have that dedicated person, they're able to spend more time doing this research on your audience versus a, college marketing team that has to think about, a bunch of different audiences and priorities. So we just pulled from this site a few examples. I really enjoyed this video that Cape Fear Community College put together about their trucking program. And again, this is, I think, a great example of speaking to like head on people's concerns. And so this woman said, hey, as a female coming into a predominantly male industry, you always have those reservations. And she talks about, I didn't know if I was strong enough to drive a truck. Like, I didn't know if I'd be made fun of for driving a truck. And she just really shared very personally that. And then it rounded out with, but you know what? The instructors at Cape Fear Community College like gave me the confidence I needed to do this career, and I'm excited about it. And so that's a great example of like helping overcome what might be keeping your target audience from engaging in this work. And I think, oh, the link didn't come when I exported it, but you can, if you go to the Strategy Hub, you can find it. Here's an example. Alamo College's district actually redesigned their website. It's a little hard to see, but basically they have this institutes page and it calls out 6 different career focused institutes based on sort of career type. And then when you click on any of these boxes, you get information on currently trending careers that this pathway would support. It shows how many people are employed locally in that career, what the average salary is, and then you can search for more information about that career. So really kind of helpful. Hey, 6 pathways, start exploring these, think about career opportunities, and very like labor market data aligned. And again, that like was that's pretty close to their homepage, but you could think about having like adult learner focused or a non-credit focused, experience like this as well. The SUNY Fulton Montgomery completely did a rebrand actually. And so their new homepage just starts with futures made here. Now is the time to start making your plan for the future. And then they have these 3 kind of key buckets, like you can afford college. So kind of really off the bat, like dispelling that concern. Hey, we're going to help you find a program. And we have personalized counseling. And so they have these 3 like right off the bat options, which I think are really inviting. Here's some examples of, we've talked about like careers that are, or posters that are very like focused on what learners care about. Get in, get out, get hired, be a nursing assistant in just 8 weeks, like very clear what you're getting with this. This is a larger campaign by the Ad Council, and I don't think it exists anymore, but I think it's a great example of some of that like imagery that we talked about beforehand of showing people and also kind of dispelling the idea that like if you want to be a blue collar worker, like you can't go to college, like college isn't for you. So this idea of like this is the new corner office, this is the new final exam, this is the new desk job. So trying to really resonate with folks who have maybe not traditionally seen themselves as a college student, or who really value more project-based and workforce aligned learning, to think about, kind of campaigns like this, we thought was really well done. All right, and then this is, you're not gonna be able to read it, but I just pulled, this is in the Strategy Hub, they have an example of a first 100-day work plan if you were to hire an adult outreach associate. And so you'll see, for example, like on here is a list of example partners, including like food pantries and local leadership and youth sports coaches, and just has an example of some of the activities that this kind of position. And even if you, I know all of us are wearing a lot of hats, you might be able to pull a couple bullets from these to add to your to-do list if you were so interested. So hopefully this could spark some ideas as well. Okay, I think that's all we got. I think that's all.